Most people believe they would recognize a murderer. They imagine someone visibly dangerous, an unstable stranger whose behavior immediately creates fear. But some criminals do not appear threatening. They work ordinary jobs, raise families, make friends, and live beside people who never suspect what they have done. Some hide their crimes for decades. In November 1983, 16-year-old Sherry Jo Elliott lived near Flint, Michigan. Sherry was quiet, careful, and deeply loved by her family. As a young child, she could spend hours coloring. Her mother, Joyce, remembered buying her a thick coloring book and watching her patiently complete every page. Relatives described Sherry as respectful, affectionate, and unusually sweet. As a teenager, she cared about her appearance. She liked her clothes to match, her hair to be properly arranged, and everything to be in place before she left home. She was also extremely cautious around strangers. During an earlier incident, a vehicle stopped while Sherry was with a friend. The occupants asked for directions. Her friend approached the car, but Sherry refused to go near it. That detail would later trouble her family. On the cold morning of November 16, 1983, Sherry prepared to walk approximately 2 blocks to her school bus stop. Before leaving, Joyce reminded her to dress warmly. It was a completely ordinary conversation between a mother and daughter. Sherry answered, "Okay, love you." Joyce left for work. Her husband, Bob Schultz, also went to work. At approximately 6:45 that morning, Sherry walked out of the house. She never reached the bus. After school, Sherry was expected to return home and follow her usual routine. Joyce often prepared yogurt mixed with whipped topping and froze it for her daughter. Sherry would sit down, watch the young and the restless, work on her nails, and eat the frozen yogurt. But that afternoon, Sherry did not come home. When the family contacted police, the initial assumption was that she might have run away. Joyce immediately rejected that explanation. Nothing was missing from Sherry's room. She had taken no additional clothing, money, or personal belongings. There had been no argument and no reason for her to disappear. Most importantly, Sherry was not the kind of teenager who would leave without telling anyone. Her family began contacting friends, relatives, and classmates. No one had seen her. As the hours passed, the fear inside the house grew. Every telephone call created hope. Every sound outside made Joyce wonder whether Sherry had returned. But night arrived without her. Somewhere between her home and a bus stop only 2 blocks away, Sherry had vanished. There was no confirmed witness, no clear description of an attacker, no known struggle, only a cold stretch of road and a family beginning to understand that Sherry had not chosen to disappear. Someone had taken her. Sherry's family refused to wait quietly. Relatives traveled to Flint, distributed flyers, and contacted everyone who might have information. They searched streets, alleys, rubbish containers, and abandoned areas. Crime Stoppers offered a reward, while local news organizations reported the disappearance. Police entered Sherry's information into the National Missing Person System. If another law enforcement agency encountered her, officers would know she had been reported missing. But Joyce did not believe Sherry was traveling voluntarily. She could barely eat. Whenever she saw an unfamiliar man in a restaurant or on the street, the same question entered her mind. Was that the person who had taken her daughter? The family wondered whether Sherry was cold, injured, or hungry. They did not know whether she was alive. Days passed without reliable information. Then, on November 20th, 1983, a local trapper was checking traps along Muller Road in Saginaw County, approximately 15 miles north of Flint. Beside the road was a water-filled drainage ditch. Inside it, the trapper discovered the body of a young girl lying face down. Police officers and forensic investigators arrived at the scene. The body was identified as Sherry Jo Elliott. The location did not appear to have been carefully selected to conceal her. Investigators believed the offender had simply pushed or placed her into the ditch before leaving. There was little physical evidence around the body. No gun was found. No bullet was recovered from the surrounding area. Her clothing had been disturbed, creating immediate concern that she had been sexually assaulted. It was also clear that she had been shot. Early one Sunday morning, a detective arrived at Joyce and Bob's home carrying a necklace. Sherry had worn it when she left for school. The detective asked Joyce whether it belonged to her daughter. She recognized it immediately. Then he told her that Sherry was dead. There's no gentle way to deliver that message. Sherry's body had been partly submerged in water. Bob went to identify her because he believed Joyce would not survive seeing her in that condition. The family moved from searching for a missing teenager to arranging her funeral. Only days earlier, Joyce had expected Sherry to return home and continue her normal life. Now she was choosing a casket for her only daughter. During the funeral, relatives watched every unfamiliar person who entered. They had heard stories about killers attending the funerals of their victims. Every stranger became suspicious. The murder had changed the way the family saw the world. The autopsy revealed the full violence of the attack. Sherry had been shot 4 times. 1 bullet struck her abdomen. 2 struck her back. Another struck the back of her head. Investigators believed the final shot resembled an execution. Even more disturbing, medical findings suggested Sherry may still have been alive when she was abandoned in the ditch. She had likely continued bleeding after the attacker left. The search for Sherry was over. The search for her killer had begun. Because Sherry's clothing was disturbed, investigators conducted a sexual assault examination. They collected swabs, preserved her clothing and undergarments, clipped her fingernails, and saved biological material. In 1983, forensic DNA profiling was not yet available in the form later used by police laboratories. Investigators preserved the evidence without knowing whether science would ever allow them to identify the person who left it. That decision would eventually solve the case. But first, detectives needed to understand how Sherry had been abducted. She was known to avoid strangers. Her family did not believe she would willingly enter an unfamiliar vehicle. Perhaps the attacker displayed a weapon. Perhaps he claimed to know her family. Perhaps he approached so quickly that she had no opportunity to escape. Investigators also needed to determine where Sherry had been held. Her family believed she may have remained alive for several days after disappearing, but police could not identify the location where she had been taken. The roadside ditch was considered a disposal site rather than the main crime scene. Flint was closely connected to the automobile industry in the early 1980s. General Motors employed large numbers of residents, and vehicles were central to everyday life. That made vehicle-based witness statements both important and extremely difficult to investigate. One person claimed to have seen Sherry entering a yellow Chevrolet Camaro. Another report involved a white van. Police compiled large lists of vehicles matching those descriptions. Without modern digital systems, the process required enormous amounts of manual work. Owners were identified. Registrations were checked. Possible connections to Sherry were investigated. The yellow Camaro report initially seemed promising. Sherry's relatives began watching every similar car they encountered. But the witness's statement eventually appeared to be false. The misleading information wasted police resources and created additional pain for the family. Every yellow Camaro became a reminder that someone had claimed to see Sherry and may have lied about it. The white van report remained unresolved. There were too many similar vehicles and too little identifying information. Investigators followed thousands of tips. Some came from genuinely concerned residents. Others were rumors, misunderstandings, or attempts to attract attention. The quantity of information became a problem. Detectives had many possible directions but no reliable path to the offender. Meanwhile, the biological evidence remained stored. It contained DNA belonging to an unknown male. But investigators could only compare that profile with someone they had already identified as a suspect. The evidence could not yet independently produce a name. The killer, therefore, had an enormous advantage. If he had no serious criminal record, no witness who recognized him, and no direct connection to Sherry, police had no clear reason to collect his DNA. He could continue living normally while investigators searched through thousands of names. The answer was already preserved inside the evidence. But the technology needed to read it had not yet been developed. When a child is murdered, investigators usually begin with the people closest to the victim. Bob Schultz, Sherry's stepfather, became one of the main suspects. He had been among the last people connected to the home before Sherry disappeared. Investigators believed parts of his account were inconsistent. His unwillingness to undergo a requested polygraph examination increased their suspicion. From a police perspective, examining Bob was part of the investigative process. For Joyce, it was devastating. She had lost her daughter, and now the man supporting her was being treated as a possible murderer. Joyce repeatedly told detectives that Bob would never hurt Sherry or any other child. Police arranged a recorded telephone conversation between Joyce and Bob, hoping he might reveal something when he believed they were speaking privately. The call produced no evidence. Investigators collected Bob's DNA. It did not match the unknown male profile recovered from Sherry's case. But the suspicion surrounding him did not immediately disappear. Detectives continued asking Joyce how she would react if Bob were eventually proven guilty. For Joyce, even hearing that question was painful. She believed he was innocent, yet she was repeatedly forced to imagine that her husband might have killed her daughter. Bob lived for years beneath that shadow. Police investigated many other men. Hundreds of people were interviewed. Over the years, approximately 123 DNA samples were reportedly collected. Some individuals provided samples voluntarily. Others were tested after investigators obtained legal authority. None matched the biological evidence. Detective after detective reviewed the case. Each investigator reconsidered old statements, re-examined vehicles, and followed remaining leads. But every promising direction eventually collapsed. There was no confirmed eyewitness, no murder weapon, no reliable vehicle registration, no confession, no suspect whose DNA matched. As the years passed, the files grew into tens of thousands of pages. Boxes contained witness statements, vehicle records, laboratory reports, and notes from approximately 20 detectives. Eventually, the tips slowed. Witnesses moved away. Memories weakened. Some people connected to the case died. The murder became what police describe as a cold case. But for Sherry's family, it was never cold. Joyce experienced nightmares in which Sherry asked why her mother had not found her. At times, she lay in Sherry's bed, surrounded by the belongings of the daughter who had never returned. Her relatives worried that grief might eventually destroy her. The unknown offender continued living freely. He worked. He developed friendships. He became known as an ordinary member of society. Because his DNA had never entered a law enforcement database, there was nothing linking his public life to the evidence preserved from Sherry's assault. The investigation had examined family members, suspicious neighbors, and reported vehicles. But the real offender remained hidden in plain sight. By 2002, DNA technology had become a major investigative tool. Michigan State Police formed a violent crime task force and reopened Sherry's case. Detectives revisited the yellow Camaro and white van reports. They re-interviewed witnesses, reconsidered previous suspects, and again examined Bob Schultz. For Joyce, every renewed investigation reopened the original trauma. She answered similar questions for multiple detectives over many years. Eventually, she told police she could no longer continue unless they had genuinely new information. She was not trying to obstruct the investigation. She was trying to protect herself from repeatedly returning to the worst moment of her life. The task force collected additional DNA samples and compared them with the unknown male profile. Again, every tested person was excluded. Investigators then uploaded the profile into CODIS, the national DNA database used to connect evidence with known offenders. The database produced no match. That did not mean the profile was useless. It meant the person responsible had not been entered into the system. He may never have been arrested for an offense requiring DNA collection. He may have committed other crimes without leaving recoverable evidence. Or he may have avoided serious criminal activity after killing Sherry. For another 20 years, the profile remained unidentified. Then, in 2022, a border official in Utah contacted Michigan authorities. A former neighbor connected to Sherry's investigation had been discovered using a false name. The man had reportedly lived under another identity for approximately 16 years. He had also left Michigan shortly after Sherry's murder. The circumstances appeared suspicious. Detectives obtained his DNA. It did not match. The man was excluded. But the investigation renewed Detective Sergeant William Arndt's interest in the case. Forensic technology had advanced beyond traditional direct comparisons. Genetic genealogy had already identified offenders in other decades-old crimes. Before that method could be used effectively, however, the case files needed to be organized. The investigation contained tens of thousands of pages, created by numerous detectives. Michigan State Police partnered with Western Michigan University. Students who passed background checks helped digitize and organize the material. They separated useful evidence from duplication and created a searchable record of the investigation. Detectives could finally examine the entire history of the case efficiently. They could see which suspects had been excluded, which witnesses had changed their accounts, and which vehicle leads remained relevant. Attention then returned to the biological evidence collected in 1983. A specialist laboratory was asked whether the DNA was suitable for advanced testing. The sample was more than 40 years old. It could have been degraded or contaminated. Scientists examined its quality, quantity, and complexity. Their conclusion created new hope. The DNA was suitable for forensic genome sequencing. After decades of silence, the evidence was ready to lead investigators towards a family and eventually towards a name. Traditional DNA comparison requires a suspect's sample. Genetic genealogy works differently. Scientists examine hundreds of thousands of genetic markers and search for people who share parts of the unknown person's DNA. Those individuals may be distant relatives who know nothing about the crime. Investigators then build family trees to determine which relative could have left the evidence. In Sherry's case, the search produced a connection to an elderly woman in Wichita, Kansas. Detectives traveled to meet her. She voluntarily provided a DNA sample. Her son also agreed to be tested. Their cooperation helped genealogists understand where the unknown offender belonged within the extended family. But the investigation faced a major complication. The woman reportedly had 79 grandchildren. Instead of producing one obvious suspect, the family tree created dozens of possibilities. Investigators needed to identify a man who was the correct age in 1983, had the proper genetic relationship, and could be connected to Michigan. Many relatives were quickly excluded. Some were too young. Others had never lived near Flint. Different branches of the family were examined through birth records, marriage documents, obituaries, and public information. Western Michigan University students assisted with open-source research. The process continued for months. Eventually, one candidate began to stand apart. His name was Ronnie Collins. Collins was approximately 75 years old when investigators identified him. He would have been in his early 30s when Sherry was murdered. He had lived in Michigan and had been in the relevant area. He also had no significant criminal history that would have placed his DNA in CODIS. On the surface, Collins appeared respectable. He had worked within the Michigan prison system, reportedly as a dental hygienist. He had a family and was known as a responsible citizen. He also played in a band and traveled around Michigan. Then investigators discovered another disturbing detail. Collins reportedly used a white van to transport band members and equipment. One of the original reports from Sherry's disappearance had involved a white van. After 40 years, that forgotten lead suddenly appeared important again. But genetic genealogy only created an investigative lead. It did not replace a direct DNA comparison. Detective Arndt contacted Collins. At that stage, the detective did not intend to arrest him. He wanted to conduct an interview and obtain a sample. Collins delayed the meeting through the holiday period. Eventually, he agreed to speak with investigators in early January 2026. Detectives prepared for the interview. Collins never arrived. He stopped answering telephone calls and did not return messages. Police then obtained legal authority to collect his DNA. When investigators went to his home, they expected to confront him. Instead, Collins's wife gave them unexpected news. On the day he was supposed to meet detectives, Ronnie Collins had taken his own life. He would never answer their questions. But his death had not ended the investigation. During the post-mortem examination, investigators could obtain the biological sample they needed. The final comparison was about to begin. The state laboratory compared Ronnie Collins's DNA with the male profile preserved from Sherry's sexual assault evidence. The result was conclusive. Collins was the man whose biological material had been recovered from Sherry's body and clothing. After 43 years, the unknown offender had a name. The respected employee, musician, husband, and neighbor was connected by forensic evidence to the assault of a 16-year-old girl. People who knew Collins had apparently seen no indication that he was capable of such violence. He had no major public criminal history. Friends considered him a good citizen. His family reportedly knew nothing about the crime. That was what made the case so frightening. Collins did not fit the image many people associate with a violent offender. He had lived among ordinary people while hiding an extraordinary secret. The DNA proved that Collins sexually assaulted Sherry. Investigators also believed he murdered her. The assault, shooting, and disposal of her body appeared to be part of the same criminal event. However, Collins died before he could be arrested or prosecuted. There would be no trial. No jury would examine the evidence. No judge would impose a sentence. Because Collins could not be questioned, several important details remained unresolved. How did he approach Sherry? Did he use the white van? Had he watched her walking route before the abduction? Did he threaten her with a gun? Where had he held her? Did anyone else assist him? Why did he choose her? Investigators also considered the timing of Collins's suicide significant. He knew police wanted to interview him. He had agreed to attend a meeting. On the day of that meeting, he ended his life. Detectives believed he understood that modern DNA evidence would be difficult to challenge. Collins had also worked inside a prison environment and knew what incarceration involved. By dying, he avoided prosecution. He also denied Sherry's family the opportunity to confront him. Detective Arndt waited for the final laboratory confirmation before contacting Joyce. He did not want to reopen the family's pain based only on a genealogical possibility. Once the match was confirmed, he called her. He explained that police had identified the man connected to Sherry's assault and considered him responsible for her murder. Then he asked whether knowing the identity changed anything for her. Joyce said it did not bring Sherry back. She still could not hold her daughter. She could not tell her she loved her. She could not recover the future taken from her. The DNA answered the question of who attacked Sherry, but an answer is not the same as healing. Then investigators told Joyce something she had not fully understood. Sherry may still have been alive when Collins left her in the ditch. For years, Joyce had hoped her daughter died quickly. Now she had to imagine Sherry alone in freezing water, losing blood and waiting for help. The mystery was solved, but the truth created another layer of pain. Ronnie Collins lived to the age of 75. Sherry Jo Elliott lived only 16 years. That difference became one of the most painful parts of the case for her family. Collins had decades to work, travel, form relationships, and play music. He was able to experience an ordinary adult life. Sherry never graduated from school. She never chose a career. Her family would never know whether she would have married, had children, or created a family of her own. Collins received the future he had denied her. Following his death, some people publicly described him as a good man. They remembered the version of Collins they had known, a colleague, musician, friend, or family member. Joyce responded that he was not the person they believed him to be. His DNA connected him to the sexual assault of her daughter. The difference between those two versions of Collins revealed an uncomfortable truth. A person can appear kind in one part of life while hiding serious violence in another. Friends may genuinely remember positive experiences. Relatives may believe someone was loving. Colleagues may view him as professional, but those memories cannot erase forensic evidence. The identification of Collins also cleared the long shadow surrounding Bob Schultz. Bob had died in January 2025 before investigators confirmed the DNA match. He never lived to hear that the evidence identified another man. For years, police had questioned him and examined his behavior. Some people may have continued to suspect him even after his DNA was excluded. Joyce wished Bob had survived long enough to see the case solved. She spoke to him after his death, telling him that investigators had finally found the real offender. The case demonstrated why solving cold cases matters not only for victims, but also for people wrongly suspected. When a crime remains unresolved, rumors fill the absence of evidence. Families question one another. Communities create theories. Innocent people can spend years trying to prove a negative. The final DNA result provided certainty about Collins's involvement, but his suicide limited what investigators could establish. They could not identify where Sherry had been held. They could not reconstruct the missing days. They could not determine with certainty whether Collins acted alone. They could not ask whether he had targeted Sherry specifically or selected her at random. Time had also destroyed possible evidence. Vehicles had disappeared. Buildings had changed. Witnesses had died. Memories had weakened. Collins had taken the complete explanation with him. Even so, knowing his identity mattered. For 43 years, Sherry's family had wondered whether her killer remained nearby. They imagined him watching news reports, observing searches, or even attending the funeral. Now they had a name and a face. They also knew he could never harm anyone again. But the discovery of his identity raised another disturbing question. Investigators questioned whether the murder of Sherry represented Ronnie Collins's first violent offense. Abducting a teenager, sexually assaulting her, shooting her 4 times, and abandoning her in a ditch required extreme control and brutality. Some detectives believed behavior of that severity may have developed through earlier offenses. That remained an investigative theory rather than a proven fact. Police began reconsidering other unresolved disappearances that shared possible similarities. One case involved 2 girls who disappeared in Michigan in 1969. The girls reportedly left school early around Halloween. A witness account suggested they entered or were picked up by someone driving a white van. Collins was connected to a band that performed in the relevant area during that period. His reported use of a white van made him a possible person of interest. But similarities are not proof. The girls' bodies were never found. There was no known biological evidence to compare with Collins's DNA. The white van could represent an important pattern, or it could be a coincidence. Investigators were left asking where Collins had traveled during his years as a musician. Had anyone previously accused him of assault? Had women survived encounters with him but never reported them? Had other disappearances occurred near locations where his band performed? His suicide prevented detectives from asking those questions directly. It also denied them the opportunity to learn whether anyone else had assisted in Sherry's crime. Even after the DNA identification, detectives remained cautious about claiming facts they could not prove. The evidence established Collins' sexual contact with Sherry. The circumstances strongly supported investigators' belief that he was also responsible for her death, but unanswered questions remained part of the case. The investigation also demonstrated the weakness of relying too heavily on eyewitness accounts. The false yellow Camaro report consumed time and resources. The white van report may have been relevant, but it was too broad to identify Collins in 1983. Human memory is imperfect. Witnesses can misunderstand what they see. Some may unintentionally combine later information with their original memory. Others may deliberately provide false details. DNA evidence does not depend on memory. When properly collected and preserved, it can remain available for new testing decades later. The investigators in 1983 could not imagine forensic genetic genealogy. But by preserving Sherry's assault kit, clothing, and biological evidence, they allowed future scientists to solve what appeared impossible. The evidence waited more than 40 years. Eventually, it revealed that the offender was not an unknown drifter who had disappeared from Michigan. He had remained inside ordinary society. He had worked, developed friendships, and traveled while investigators searched for him. The monster had not been hiding in a distant place. He had been hiding behind an ordinary life. The crime against Sherry lasted only a short period. Its consequences lasted for generations. Joyce lost her only daughter. Sherry's father lost the chance to watch his child become an adult. Bob lost a stepdaughter and spent years beneath suspicion. Detectives carried the frustration of an unsolved case through their careers. The Flint community remembered the girl who vanished during a 2-block walk to her school bus. Every cold case creates a similar circle of damage. The victim is at the center, but the effects spread through families, witnesses, investigators, and communities. Parents become afraid to let their children walk alone. Relatives examine every memory, searching for something they failed to notice. Families wonder whether the offender remains close enough to observe their grief. For decades, Joyce did not know whether Sherry's killer lived nearby. She wondered whether he had attended the funeral, followed the investigation, or watched as police pursued innocent people. Modern DNA technology finally gave him a name. But Ronnie Collins should not become the center of Sherry's story. Sherry was more than a victim in a cold case file. She was the little girl who loved coloring. She once wore a purple dress as a flower girl at a family wedding. She visited cousins, cared about matching her clothes, and liked arranging her hair. She watched television and ate the frozen yogurt her mother prepared. She was shy, cautious, and deeply loved. Those details matter because crime reports often reduce victims to injuries, evidence, and timelines. A police file records how a person died. It cannot fully record how that person lived. Sherry's family continued speaking about her because they wanted people to remember the girl who had been taken, not only the violence committed against her. Her case also carries an important message. Time no longer guarantees safety for an offender. A crime that cannot be solved today may become solvable through tomorrow's technology. Evidence stored in a box can contain an identity. A distant relative who has never heard of a murder can provide the connection needed to identify a suspect. A family tree can succeed where witness statements, vehicle searches, and direct database comparisons failed. But justice delayed still has consequences. Bob died before hearing that his name had been cleared. Other witnesses and investigators died before the case was solved. Collins escaped a courtroom by ending his life. That is why advanced forensic techniques must be used as quickly as possible. They can identify offenders while they are still alive. They can clear innocent suspects. They can allow families to receive answers before parents and relatives are gone. The identification of Collins did not provide simple closure. Joyce could not bring Sherry home. She could not recover the missing years. She could not watch the offender stand trial. But after 43 years, she finally knew the identity of the man connected to her daughter's assault. Sherry Jo Elliott deserved adulthood, choices, love, and a future. All of that was taken from her. But she was never forgotten. Her family continued demanding answers. Investigators returned to the evidence. Students organized the files. Scientists followed the genetic trail. And the man who had hidden behind an ordinary life was finally exposed. Her name was Sherry Jo Elliott. After 43 years, the silence surrounding her case was finally broken.